But then you've also dealt with law students and watched them transition, especially through clinic work. And I love that Third Year Anywhere. That's such a great name and
It's a
concept.
great program, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you've seen it from all sides and experienced it yourself. So I just wanted to lay that groundwork so that our listeners understand this is coming from lived experience, from clinical background, from research, from actually helping people day to day. And it just gives it a lot more weight and heft, and they're more likely to try it out. Because I know lawyers are skeptical.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're
We are a
trained to
skeptical.
be. Yeah.
Exactly. We're a skeptical bunch. So now with that background in mind, let's start talking about the significance of professional integrity and community outreach for new and young lawyers. Because, and I always tell law students, especially 30, I'm like, you don't know anything about practicing law yet. You know how to think like a lawyer, write like a lawyer, speak like a lawyer, but you don't actually know how to practice law yet. And they're always shocked or offended. It's okay, you'll find out in your first year. But then they're so focused on trying to figure out how to practice law, they forget this other stuff here. So,
Yeah.
what is the relevance of all this to our practice?
I like to start with even the preamble to the rules of professional conduct. And the preamble actually touches on professional integrity and says, a lawyer's conduct should conform to the requirements of the law, both in professional service to clients and in the lawyer's business and personal affairs. So it's not just how I conduct myself at work, it's how I conduct myself personally. And even though they don't use the words personal integrity, that really is what we're talking about. So the underpinning, the foundation, underpinning and foundation of the rules of professional conduct, which is that is our guidebook, that's what we're mandated to follow, starts with this idea, this concept of professional and personal integrity.
It does. And we know when your personal life falls apart, it will impact your professional life. There's no way around it. We
We
see it in
think
the
that we
news all
can
the
live
time.
and yeah, we think that we
Yes.
can compartmentalize and we've got a box over here and a box over here. There is not a person I've spoken to who didn't come to the realization at some point of, yeah, what happens here impacts here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It does. So let's start with defining professional integrity in the legal context. So you talked about the rules of professional conduct. What are some of the key characteristics and behaviors that define professionalism for a lawyer?
Yeah. So when we look at professionalism, and I'm using professionalism and professional integrity somewhat synonymously. I think that we can look at them together. If you are acting in a professional way, you are acting with integrity. And so some of the components there are self-awareness, being aware of what your core values are, what your strengths are, what areas need improvement that you need to keep on working on. Your personal characteristics. Am I an extrovert? Am I an introvert, an ambivert? What are my communication styles? Having a self-awareness of who you are, how you show up in the world, and what you have to bring to the world is really important. And I think that's the first key is let's be self-aware. Another characteristic is using competence and good judgment or being competent and using good judgment. In other words, knowing when I am not competent to handle something. And that obviously goes directly to the rules of professional conduct and competence. And but having an awareness around I'm in over my head. I remember when I first started working at, again, very large law firm in Pennsylvania, and I was very pleased that my supervising attorney was giving me a lot of responsibility because he had a lot of confidence in me. But I realized at some point he was giving me too much responsibility. I was a second year and he was giving me too much responsibility. I was in over my head. And I fretted about this for a couple of weeks. And finally, I asked him for a meeting And to this day, I remember being in this big conference room. It was only the two of us sitting at the table. And I said, and I had practiced this over and over, I so appreciate the confidence that you have in me, and I believe that it is very well placed. However, and I went on to say, I need more supervision. There are things that I don't know, and I actually don't think I should know at this point. And so I had to admit, and it was so difficult because you never want to say, I can't do this. But I realized that in order for me to actually live into these rules that I have sworn to uphold, that I had to be able to say, I'm not competent to do this, at least not fully competent. I need your help. And so we have to be able to, however uncomfortable it is, and it will be uncomfortable, we have to be able to say that. Another one is effective communication skills. We are mandated to communicate with our client and to other people in the legal process, but there's nothing about the skills to communicate. It's not something that comes naturally to some people. And so we need to be able to effectively communicate and have a sense of what our communication style is and be able to adapt
Yes,
appropriately.
adapting is very essential. I was in a talk recently at a conference, and I can't remember her name right now, but there was a woman who talked about, especially for this generation coming up, they're so used to text messaging and social media that they don't even write full sentences. Forget punctuation, full sentences. And it's not effective in the legal setting,
Yeah.
not to your supervisors, not to your clients. And so, like you said, not only is it not doesn't come naturally to some people for whatever reason, maybe your upbringing or what have you, but generationally,
Yeah.
if you're not accustomed to writing full sentences and complete thoughts when you are communicating with someone, you're going to have to practice doing it. I had some young people who I mentor, just like you, right? The students call me on my phone and when they're having trouble or a tough time about non-academic things, they'll send me a text message. And once someone had just sent me screenshots, that was the text message. And I said, I said, what are you communicating? And then so they sent
Mhm.
me a video of the screenshots. I said, I still don't, what are you trying to communicate to me? And they're like, oh, I was giving you an update on this thing I'm working on. I'm like, you need to use actual words. And I had to tell them that. And I'm thinking, I didn't think I'd have to tell someone they have to use actual words. But that is how young people, and they're not that young. This person's probably in their early 30s, right?
Okay.
And so I just wanted to highlight that point. We have to be mindful. These 20-year-olds graduating from college, 20 somethings coming out of law school, they're going to big law firms like where you are and where I was. And they got to understand your supervisor does not communicate that way. So
Yeah.
when we're talking about effective communication, not only do you have to do it, you have to recognize that you don't have the skills and you need to ask, how do you want me to communicate with you? So
Yeah.
that it's clear and
Absolutely.
concise. Yeah, so that's a good point.
Yeah. And tied to that, another characteristic is interpersonal relationship skills. A talk that I'm going to be giving soon at a law school actually has to do with healthy boundaries and relationships because administrators are saying to me, I don't know what happened, and maybe this is a kind of a layover from COVID, but the ability for people to have healthy relationships and to set healthy boundaries is just disappeared. That is when we talk about professionalism and professional integrity, we have to set boundaries. And I always say we don't set boundaries to control other people's behavior. We set boundaries to protect ourselves and to manage our own behavior and to be able to say, this is what's important and to prioritize our time and our availability. So that is another one. Trustworthiness. We talked about adaptability in the sense of being able to communicate and using good judgment. So adaptability is really important for a lawyer and for professionalism. And I do find that with adaptability, that is a characteristic and maybe a skill that I think has not been focused on with the generations coming into law school. I think that there's this, I want to know how to do it. Give me the formula. and
Absolutely.
and then I'll be okay. It's give me
Yes.
something to hold on to.
Yeah.
And it's getting comfortable with this gray space and having to adapt to different situations. So that's important. The willingness to continue to learn is really a part of, it's also a part of professionalism. We have to not be in the mindset, not be in a fixed mindset of this is the way we do it and I know everything I need to know, but to have a growth mindset. Good time management, that is a key characteristic of professionalism. And it is something that a lot of people just have not really cultivated yet, is good time management skills. And then the one that I think people have, that I work with people when I coach people most on, is the ability to manage the competing priorities of work and personal life. And I think that even people who are very emotionally intelligent and mature in other ways have problems with this. It is just, it's so easy to get sucked in to work and to not know how to get off of the treadmill. So I
Yeah.
think that is something that people really struggle with. And then the last thing that I will mention as a is something that we don't always see, but I believe needs to be a characteristic and should be is compassion. We need to thread compassion through everything that we do, and even making hard decisions and having difficult conversations with people and telling people things that they may not want to hear, and even presenting an argument and really zealously representing our client, we can still do that with compassion.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have stories for each one of those things you just said. So I don't want to go too much off because we still have some other things about how we're going to create culture and how we do
Yes.
outreach. Because we don't want to just talk about what does this look like. We want to show you how to create it.
Mhm.
The compassion is so important. And one thing I do as a professor is I share personal stories about how I incorporated compassion into my work. Because when I was at the big law firm, I was doing collections and debt and bankruptcy and representing the creditors. And so I told my students I hated doing that work because a lot of those people were people like my mom. She was a single mom doing the best that she could.